guys, my name is Roxy and welcome to True Crime Roxy. So today's case is about the B1 butcher, which is Namibia's serial killer or unknown serial killer. So we're going to talk about it. As far as I know it, this is the only serial killer that Namibia has ever had. I don't know if you know where Namibia is. It is a very small country in Africa. It is the neighboring country to South Africa. So let's get into the case. So the B1 butcher is a serial killer that basically murdered his victims, dismembered them and dumped them along the B1 National Road in Namibia. That's why he got the name, or he or she. The serial killer is still unknown till today, and he or she got the name from the national road, the B1 butcher. The butcher part is the way that the person dismembered the bodies of its victims. So the B1 butcher took the lives of 5 victims from 2005 to 2007. So on the 20th of August 2005, the dismembered body of a 22-year-old woman was discovered at the Western Bypass near the Vanek power station. And this was the first victim of the B1 butcher. Her name was Melanie Johnson. Then on the 25th of August 2005, a month after Melanie Johnson was discovered, the body of 21-year-old Unita Mabula was discovered on the Western Bypass, but this time it was near the Windhoek Turf Club. This victim was decapitated, and a month after Unita Mabula's body was discovered, her head was also discovered on the 24th of October 2005. The way that these bodies were discovered made the police think that they had a serial killer because the two bodies shared very similar similarities. And I forgot almost to mention that the head that was discovered of the second victim was found in the along the B1 National Road between Windhoek and Rehoboth. Now Windhoek is the capital city and Rehoboth is say approximately 80 kilometers south of Windhoek. So everyone was a little bit worried, but it was way too early to say that they had a serial killer on the loose. So everything was quiet for 2 years. Say approximately in June 2007, a body or a dissected torso was discovered, and the police feared that the B1 butcher might be back and committing these murders again. So the dissected torso of a woman was discovered approximately 42 kilometers north of Windhoek. The torso was dissected in two and it was dumped in a rubbish bin. This was the first part of the third victim's body. Then after the dissected torso was found approximately 30 kilometers north of Rehoboth, 2 thighs were also found along the B1 National Road in rubbish bins. So this was the body parts of the same victim. Say a month or a few days after, more body parts were discovered from the same victim, and the body parts that were discovered were 2 lower legs as well as the head and the feet. And the feet had 3 toes missing. So I think at this point the police were more alert, and I think at this time they really knew that they had a serial killer on the loose. Although it was 2 years later, this female had very similar signs or very similar ways of dissection and refrigeration. I didn't mention that the reason why they thought these murders were connected is because the bodies were cut up in basically almost the same way, and all these bodies were refrigerated, so meaning that the serial killer killed these women, dissected them, kept their body parts in a refrigerator, and then dumped them with time along the B1 road. The third victim was later identified as Sana Garus. Sorry for the pronunciation. She was a 36-year-old female, and she was identified by her mother because she had I think this was before all her body parts were found, but she was identified by her mother because she had a gunshot wound in one of her thighs, and that's how her mother identified her body. Now, Sana got the most publicity because most of the articles that I found on the B1 Butcher was based on Sana's disappearance and how she was found. There's not really enough information on the first two victims. I tried googling on the internet, but I couldn't really find a lot of information on the first two victims and how they were dissected, except for the fact that the second victim's head was later on found between Windhoek and Rehoboth. So Sana was last seen a few days, I think on the 13th of June. Sana was seen at a restaurant called Zumwert. She was seen outside this restaurant, and 3 days later her torso was discovered. A month later, in July 2007, more body parts were discovered. These were the body parts of another two victims. First, the body parts were found in July. Then a month later, more body parts were found in August. And then later on, body parts belonging to the same victims were also found in September. So these body parts were found in July, August, and September. Now, the two last victims were never identified, which is kind of a little bit worrying because it is strange that these victims were never identified by the families, but according to the reports, the head and the face you could really see who these people were, but for some reason they were never identified. One thing I know for sure is that not all the body parts were found, so makes you wonder whether there were more victims but the body parts were just not found, because Namibia is a very quiet, although crime happens a lot, serial killers and things so extreme rarely happen here. So it was a bit strange that something would happen in such a small country. But I wonder if there were more victims but the body parts were just not found. But as I've said, these two victims were never identified. I also read an article that said that some of these victims' body parts were found with Sana's. So it is in the same timeline, but these victims were never identified. Now, I think I have a reason why these victims were never identified. Now, most of these victims were known, or the first three victims were known as sex workers that worked the center. Now, or that worked in Windhoek near Auspenplatz. Now, the one family disputes the fact that one of these victims were sex workers, but a witness said that she knew two of these victims, and she knew that these two of these victims were basically on the street. Now, two of these victims that one of the witnesses know is one of the victims that the family say that she wasn't a sex worker. But guys, being a sex worker is not something new in Namibia. Although it's not legal, it is not something new. So it might be possible that all these victims were sex workers. That's why probably the last two victims were never identified, because normally when people turn to sex work, it's probably because they don't have a support system or family, and it can also be because they maybe ran away from home and were living alone. So that could be the that could be the reason why the last two victims were never identified by family members. So like I've said, there's not really a lot of information on these victims and their background. You guys know that I love giving background on victims, especially when it comes to such gruesome murders, but unfortunately there was not really a lot of information on these victims. So let's get to the suspects, guys. As I've mentioned earlier, the B1 butcher was never caught. There was never really a person that we could identify as a person that was committing these murders, but there were two suspects that were basically held in prison or were questioned. So let me talk about the first one, Hans Husselman. So Hans Hasselman is the first suspect that we are going to discuss. He was a 40-year-old man that previously had a life sentence or served a life sentence. He has spent approximately 14 years in prison previously for two murders that he committed in 1989. So I think Hans Hasselman at this moment has more evidence pointing in his direction. The second suspect is a German-born Namibian. Guys, I literally just talked a lot of things and the camera was not recording, so I'm so mad at myself. But anyway, let's get back to Hans Hasselman, which is the first suspect. So Hans Hasselman was found dead in his apartment in 2008. He committed suicide. This was during the police investigation on the B1 butcher. Now, there was a suicide note left behind, but basically the suicide note only said that his murder or his suicide was between him and God, and that's what he wrote to his family. So there wasn't really anything that came from it. There was, however, evidence pointing in Hans Hasselman's direction, but then again, the evidence was not enough. Now, the first piece of evidence that was found was the DNA of Sana Garus, which was the third woman that was murdered by the B1 butcher, was found in his apartment. So her DNA was found in his apartment and on one of his jackets. So that was so far the strongest evidence that was found by the Namibian police. The second piece of evidence that also points into or to Hans Hasselman's direction was a letter that was sent to the Namibian police about the second victim's murder, and on this letter DNA was found, and the DNA that was found on this letter matched the DNA of Hans Hasselman. So these two pieces of evidence points in his direction, but the police also said that they don't believe that the B1 butcher acted alone. They actually believe that it could be two people or three people, or it could be copycats, people that were copying the first two murders in 2005. But based on the evidence that was found on Hans Hasselman, it was kind of pointing in his direction, but there was also rumors and news reports that I found that basically it was being said that the evidence was planted. But guys, I'm not saying that is true. That's probably his defense argument. But Hans Hasselman did have a really bad record, and that is probably why it makes him look a little bit more guilty. He has a very bad history. He did serve I think 2 life sentences, but he did serve a life sentence in prison. He spent 14 years in prison, and he was released on good behavior. Now, when Hans was only 21 years old back in 1988, he committed 2 murders. The first murder that he committed was in May 1988, where he basically shot someone and robbed them, and this was also along the B1 road. And then the second murder was in June, approximately a month later. The second murder, he stabbed a gatekeeper in Rehoboth. So he did have a really bad track record, and he did spend time in prison. He spent 14 years and 8 months in prison, and he was released a year before the B1 butcher or the B1 serial killing started happening. So a lot of evidence point in Hans's direction, but there was never a conclusion from the Namibian police that he was the one committing these crimes, because first of all, he passed away and there was not enough evidence, even though they did find DNA of the victim in his apartment and his DNA on the letter. It was still ruled inconclusive. The police probably have a very good reason for that. I'm not a police officer, so I'm not going to give my opinion on this, but this was the first victim. So the second victim was a German born Namibian. As far as I couldn't really find a lot of information on him, but all that I basically know is that he was accused of rape, and basically this person said that he wanted to kind of like kill this person. Like, again guys, this was just the information that I found on the internet. So he tried to murder this person, or the person said that he tried to murder them, but somehow nothing came from this. But he spent quite a while in prison, basically because they were trying to investigate whether he was linked to the B1 butcher murders, and because of this rape accusation and attempted murder accusation. But he was later released from prison, and there wasn't really a lot of information on him. I'm going to leave his name on screen. I really don't remember his name, but I'm going to leave his name on screen because I also cannot pronounce the name. That's probably one of the reasons why I can't remember it. So he was later released, and there was not enough evidence, and I know he later on sued the Namibian government because of unlawful arrest. So yeah, this was the two suspects, but as I've said earlier, the police suspect that more than one person was involved, or it was one person and there was a series of copycats. Now I did mention earlier that they suspected that 2007 was not the last time that the B1 butcher murdered someone, but I don't think this was the B1 butcher, and the police also don't think that this was the B1 butcher, although this person's body was discovered also dismembered. But the similarities between these victims, because I know serial killers really pride themselves on the method that they use to murder their victims, or to dissect or get rid of their victims, and this victim was totally different. Although the body was dissected, secondly, it didn't show signs of refrigeration, and it actually was burned. The body parts were burned. The body was also not discovered near the B1 National Road as all the other victims were discovered. This body was found on a farm in Rehoboth. So first of all, the body was burned. It wasn't near the B1 National Road, and that's why they eventually said that they don't believe that this was the B1 butcher. And so far as I know, what the last murder of the B1 butcher was in 2007, and he claimed the life of 5 victims, in which 2 were never identified. So yeah guys, so that is basically all for today. I don't have more information on the B1 butcher. If you know more than I know, please leave information in the comment section, because sometimes the reason why I don't like doing cases from Namibia is because of the lack of information. So it is difficult. I live in Namibia, but it's difficult for me to do cases from Namibia because of the lack of information. Most of the information that you get on these cases are basically just news reports. You don't really find something, or you don't really find information on Wikipedia. This was like the first case from Namibia that I found information on Wikipedia. So yeah, this is basically all that I got from this case. So if you have more information, leave it down in the comment section. Now guys, please remember, I mean no disrespect to the families involved. I'm purely bringing you guys this video for informational purposes only. So I'll see you guys again in this week with another true crime video. Bye.